As she reached him, Ethan took her hand, his grip steady and sure. His eyes, brimming with quiet joy, searched hers as he whispered, "You are incredible." The officiant's voice carried through the sacred stillness of the church, but Anna barely heard it. She was too focused on the weight of the moment, the way love surrounded her, even in the absence of those who had rejected her. When Ethan spoke his vows, his voice was strong, unwavering. "Meeting you was the greatest miracle of my life," he said, the words filling every inch of the space between them. "We may not be wealthy, we may not have the approval of everyone we love, but we have each other. That's all I need. I will love you honestly, support you completely, and remind you every single day how incredible you are." Tears pricked at the corners of Anna's eyes, not from sorrow but from the overwhelming depth of love in his words. When it was her turn, she inhaled deeply before speaking. "I spent a long time thinking that love had to be proven, that it had to meet expectations placed upon it," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. "But today, standing here with you, I know that love is not measured in grand gestures or in the approval of others. It is measured in the way we choose each other, again and again, no matter the circumstances. And I will always choose you." A hush fell over the church as the weight of her words settled. Then, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to embrace them, casting a warm glow around them as they exchanged rings. And with that, it was done. As they turned to face the congregation, the sound of applause filled the space, echoing off the historic walls. Anna's heart swelled as she looked out at the faces of those who had gathered. Their smiles, their warmth, it was more than enough. Outside, the spring breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers as the church doors opened. The celebration was just beginning. And yet, even in the joy of the moment, she could not shake the thought of what was to come. Because across town, her parents and sister were seated at a lavish brunch, raising their glasses to toast Lauren's upcoming wedding, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to unravel everything they had built. The reception at the Harvest was exactly as Anna had envisioned, warm, intimate, and filled with the quiet hum of genuine happiness. The soft glow of chandeliers illuminated the brick-lined walls, while the comforting aroma of New England clam chowder and freshly grilled salmon filled the air. Guests engaged in easy conversation, laughter bubbling from every corner of the room. It was not an extravagant affair, but it was real. It was hers. Standing beside Ethan, Anna felt a quiet sense of triumph. Despite everything, despite the absence of her family, despite the judgments and whispers, she had made it to this moment surrounded by people who truly cared. She allowed herself to exhale, to bask in the warmth of the occasion. Then, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, a murmur that rippled through the crowd like a distant storm rolling in. Anna noticed Thomas Walker, a respected executive in the pharmaceutical industry, glance down at his phone, his expression hardening. He had been speaking with her lab professor, engaged in a conversation about her latest research, but now his attention was entirely elsewhere. Anna felt a strange chill creep down her spine as Thomas lifted his gaze, locking eyes with her. His usual air of composed authority had taken on a different weight, one laced with something unreadable. "Dr. Miller," he said, his tone careful, controlled. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The surrounding conversations died down, guests sensing the abrupt change in energy. Ethan's hand instinctively found Anna's, a silent act of reassurance. Anna nodded, her voice steady despite the unease settling in her chest. "Of course." Thomas held up his phone, the screen glowing with an all-too-familiar Instagram post. Anna's stomach twisted as she read the words. "I am too embarrassed to attend my sister's cheap wedding. I wouldn't want my friends to see something so modest. Real celebrities understand, right?" Beneath the caption was a photo of Lauren, draped in a designer gown, surrounded by luxury shopping bags. Her parents had both liked the post. Her mother had even commented. "That's right. The real celebration will be at Lauren's wedding." For a moment, Anna could hear nothing but the dull roar in her ears. The edges of her vision blurred, the warmth of the room vanishing into a cold, hollow numbness. They hadn't just skipped her wedding. They had mocked it. Publicly. She forced herself to take a slow breath, her fingers tightening around Ethan's. All around her, guests whispered, shifting uncomfortably. The betrayal had been exposed, not in private, but in front of an entire room of people who had gathered to celebrate her. Then, Thomas's expression darkened further. "Anna, I need you to understand something," he said carefully. "This isn't just an insult. It's a problem." Anna blinked, forcing herself to focus. "What do you mean?" Thomas exhaled, his grip tightening around his phone. "The Richardson family, Lauren's future in-laws, have major business dealings within our industry. Their reputation is built on exclusivity and high-class branding. This kind of public display? It's not just cruel. It's reckless." Anna's breath caught. Across the room, James, Lauren's fiancé, had gone rigid, his own phone lighting up with notification after notification. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the flood of messages, his expression shifting from confusion to something much closer to panic. Then his phone rang. Loud. Urgent. James hesitated for only a second before answering. "What?" His voice was sharp, strained. The color drained from his face as he listened. "No. That's impossible. They wouldn't." His jaw clenched as he turned away from the crowd, gripping the back of his chair for support. But his voice, though hushed, still carried through the stunned silence of the reception. "What do you mean the investors are reconsidering? This is Lauren's personal account. It has nothing to do with..." He stopped abruptly, listening, his free hand raking through his hair in growing frustration. Anna watched as realization dawned on him. His entire world, the luxury, the security, the carefully curated connections, was beginning to crack. Thomas, still standing beside her, sighed. "James's company has a $50 million deal in the works with key investors who take their brand image very seriously." He tapped his phone, scrolling. "Lauren's post is already making the rounds in business circles. I can guarantee you, calls are being made right now." As if on cue, James let out a string of curses before turning sharply on his heel, eyes burning with barely contained fury. Anna felt no satisfaction in watching him unravel. Only a strange, quiet detachment. She had spent years feeling like the lesser daughter. The overlooked one. The disappointment. But now. Now she was the one standing still while their world fell apart. Ethan leaned in, his voice low. "Are you okay?" Anna exhaled slowly, then nodded. Yes. And for the first time in a long time, she truly meant it. The weight of the revelation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The warmth that had filled the reception moments ago had been replaced by an almost eerie silence. Anna remained still, watching as the storm unfolded before her. James was no longer just frustrated, he was unraveling. His once confident demeanor had crumbled into barely concealed panic as his phone continued to vibrate in his trembling hands. Every incoming message, every hushed phone call, chipped away at the carefully curated life he had built. "This is a disaster," James muttered under his breath, his fingers tightening around his phone. "Lauren, what the hell were you thinking?" Across the room, guests whispered among themselves, some subtly checking their own phones. The news was spreading. People were watching. Then, the heavy doors of the restaurant burst open. A gust of cold air swept through the room as three figures rushed inside, Anna's mother, father, and Lauren. Their expressions were nothing like the composed, elegant masks they usually wore. Their faces were pale, drawn with desperation. The usual air of superiority her mother carried had been stripped away, replaced by something raw, almost frantic. Anna, her mother's voice was sharp with urgency, her breath uneven. "Please, we need to talk." Anna didn't move. She simply watched them. For years, she had been the one who sought their approval, who longed for their validation. But now, the roles had shifted. Lauren stepped forward, her movements unsteady. The confidence that had once dripped from her every word was gone. "Anna, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "James is furious. The company is in trouble. You have to help us." Anna let the words settle in the air. "Help them." The irony was almost laughable. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Help you?" Lauren's lips parted, but no words came. "You mocked me," Anna continued, her voice calm but unwavering. "You dismissed my wedding as embarrassing. And now, you want my help." Her mother stepped in quickly, her voice softening in an attempt to salvage the moment. "Sweetheart, we never meant." Anna held up a hand, cutting her off with effortless authority. "No," she said simply. "You meant every word." The weight of the statement landed hard. Lauren's breath hitched. I didn't think." "You didn't think," Anna repeated, her voice quiet but sharp. "Or you didn't think there would be consequences." Lauren flinched. Across the room, Thomas Walker stood, adjusting his suit cuffs, his gaze cool and assessing. "Miss Richardson," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is no longer just a personal matter. This is a public issue, one that has raised serious ethical concerns within our industry." Her father, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Then there's still a chance to fix this." His voice was uncharacteristically thin, laced with something Anna had never heard from him before, uncertainty. Thomas met his gaze with a measured expression. "Trust is not rebuilt overnight," he said plainly. "Reputation is a currency that, once spent carelessly, is difficult to recover." A slow, dawning realization flickered in her father's eyes. Lauren's engagement, the life she had so meticulously designed, was crumbling. James, who had been silent, suddenly turned to Lauren with a venomous glare. "You lied to me," he snapped, his voice shaking with anger. "You told me this wedding wasn't important. That your family supported you." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "I have worked for years to build my career, my reputation, and in one night, you've put it all at risk." Lauren reached for him, desperation flickering across her face. "James, I didn't mean." He pulled away. "That doesn't matter now." His voice was cold, detached. "Because this mess, is something I can't afford to be part of." A strangled sound escaped Lauren's lips. "James." But he was already walking away, his phone pressed to his ear, calling someone more important. Silence fell again. Her mother, who had always placed so much value in appearance, in reputation, in status, now stood amidst a room full of people who had witnessed her downfall. The people she had once deemed unimportant, irrelevant, beneath her. And Anna? For the first time in her life, she felt nothing for them. No anger. No sadness. No desire to fix things. Just freedom. She turned to Ethan, who had been by her side through it all, his steady presence grounding her. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Anna looked back at the three people who had once controlled so much of her life and simply said, "I think we're done here." Her mother's lips parted, as if to protest, but no words came. Lauren lowered her head, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Her father just exhaled, the weight of his choices finally settling on his shoulders. Anna turned back toward the reception, back toward the life she had built for herself. Behind her, the door closed with a quiet finality. She did not look back. The silence that followed her words was heavier than anything Anna had ever experienced. It was not the silence of shock, nor of quiet contemplation, it was the silence of realization. The moment when a truth too sharp to ignore settled deep into the bones of everyone present. Her mother stood frozen, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Her father, always the silent observer, exhaled heavily, his expression hollow. And Lauren was unraveling. The once confident, effortlessly poised sister who had always been the center of attention now stood trembling, her mascara-smudged eyes darting between James, her parents, and Anna. The weight of the fallout was pressing down on her, suffocating. "But we're family," Lauren's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. It was not the biting, condescending tone she had once wielded so effortlessly, it was something raw, desperate. Anna tilted her head slightly, considering the words, letting them hang between them like a fragile thread. "Family?" she repeated, her voice calm but unyielding. "That's an interesting choice of words." Lauren flinched. "You made it clear what family meant to you when you called my wedding embarrassing. When you laughed about it. When you made sure the world knew that my happiness wasn't enough for you," Anna continued, her voice growing steadier with every word. Her mother took a shaky breath. "Anna, sweetheart, we—" "No," Anna interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "Not this time. You don't get to rewrite the story now that the consequences are catching up to you." The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, but it was no longer suffocating, it was freeing. Across the room, Thomas Walker watched the exchange with quiet interest. He had remained silent since delivering his final judgment on Lauren's actions, but now, as if sensing that the moment was reaching its inevitable conclusion, he stepped forward. "Miss Richardson," he addressed Lauren, his voice level but firm. "This is not just about family. Your actions have raised serious ethical concerns. In our world, reputation is currency, and yours has been spent carelessly." Lauren swallowed hard, her shoulders curling inward. "Then what can I do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas regarded her for a long moment before speaking. "An apology is not enough. Words mean little without action. You will need to show that you understand the gravity of your choices, not just to me, but to everyone who has watched this unfold." Her mother's hand tightened around her clutch. "Then there's still a way to fix this," she pressed. Thomas's gaze didn't waver. "Fix? No. Rebuilding trust is not the same as fixing an image. It takes time. Effort. Genuine remorse." Anna exhaled slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. The final moment where the people who had always dismissed her, belittled her, finally saw her, not as an afterthought, not as someone to be brushed aside, but as a force they could no longer ignore. She turned to Lauren, studying her carefully. For the first time, her sister looked small. For years, Anna had wanted this moment, to be seen, to be valued, to have them admit they had been wrong. But now, standing in front of them, she realized something. She didn't need their validation. She never had. She had built a life of her own, filled with people who loved her without conditions, without the weight of expectations and appearances. And that was enough. "You have a lot of work to do," Anna said, her voice softer now, but firm. "And for the first time in your life, you're going to have to do it without me holding you up." Lauren's breath hitched, but she said nothing. Her mother opened her mouth as if to protest, but Anna simply turned away. She had spent years chasing after people who had never once turned back for her. She was done. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Yes." And with that, she walked away, stepping into a life that was finally, completely, her own. 5 years had passed since that unforgettable night. The seasons had changed, the world had moved forward, and so had Anna. The echoes of that evening, the betrayal, the confrontation, the weight of finally walking away, no longer haunted her. They were memories, distant yet significant, like old photographs kept in a drawer. Moments that had once defined her pain but no longer dictated her future. Now, as she stood in front of First Parish once again, she let the cool spring breeze wash over her. The air smelled of blooming alyssum, just as it had on her wedding day. But today, something was different. She was no longer a woman trying to prove her worth to those who had never valued her. She was standing here as a woman who had built a life on her own terms. A small giggle broke through the stillness. "Emma, slow down," Anna called gently, watching as her 3-year-old daughter twirled through the church garden, her tiny hands outstretched, catching flower petals drifting in the wind. Sunlight danced through her curls, and in her bright, curious eyes, Anna saw traces of Ethan, the same unwavering kindness, the same steady warmth. Ethan stepped up beside her, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "They're already inside," he murmured. Anna exhaled slowly, nodding. Inside the small restaurant, her family, what remained of it, waited. Not the family she had spent years chasing, but the one that had learned, little by little, how to truly love. It had taken time. Years of distance. Pain. Reflection. And in the end, not everyone had found their way back. Her parents had suffered for their choices. The collapse of their carefully curated social standing had forced them to see the world differently. Losing their financial security had been devastating, but losing their daughter had been worse. The realization had come too late, but still, they had tried. Lauren had fallen the hardest. Her engagement had ended. The luxury she had once flaunted had crumbled into nothing. For months, she had disappeared, retreating into silence, unwilling to face the wreckage of her own making. Then, one day, a letter had arrived. "I work in a flower shop now," she had written. "A customer told me the flowers I arranged made her smile. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had done something real." Anna had read it twice, then a third time. She had waited to respond. Not out of bitterness, but because forgiveness could not be forced. It had to be real. Now, 5 years later, Lauren sat inside the restaurant, waiting. As Anna stepped through the door, familiar faces turned toward her. Her father lifted his head, his once stoic expression now softened by time. Her mother, who had spent so many years prioritizing appearances over emotions, now looked at Emma with something that almost resembled understanding. And Lauren, she looked different. Not polished, not untouchable. Just, human. "Hey," Lauren said, her voice hesitant, but sincere. Anna pulled out a chair, setting Emma in the seat beside her. "Hey." A quiet settled between them, not an uncomfortable one, but the kind that belonged to people who had once lost each other and were now trying, slowly, to find their way back. It was not perfect. But it was real. Thomas Walker had once told her that rebuilding trust took time. That words meant nothing without action. He had been right. And though the journey had been painful, though the scars would always remain, Anna had finally reached a place where she no longer needed the past to define her. She had moved forward. Outside, the spring breeze lifted again, carrying the scent of blooming flowers through the open window. Emma laughed, reaching for her grandfather's hand, and for the first time in a long time, Anna's mother wiped her eyes, not with frustration or regret, but with something that looked a lot like gratitude. Life was not measured in wealth or status. It was measured in moments like these. And for Anna, that was enough. The story of Anna is a powerful reminder that true worth is not defined by wealth, social status, or the approval of others. It speaks to the struggle of many who seek validation from family, only to realize that love and respect cannot be forced, they must be earned. In today's world, where appearances often overshadow sincerity, Anna's journey teaches us the value of choosing authenticity over pretense. It is a lesson in self-worth, in walking away from toxic relationships, and in understanding that real love exists in those who stand by us, not those who only claim to when it is convenient. Forgiveness, as shown in the end, is not about forgetting, it is about letting go, freeing ourselves from the past, and embracing the life we build on our own terms. In a society obsessed with status, Anna's story reminds us that happiness is found in what is real, not in what looks perfect. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alex, and tonight, I bring you a story that will challenge the way you see love, family, and self-worth. Imagine building a life filled with love, only to have the very people who should celebrate you turn their backs. Imagine standing at the altar, not in sorrow, but in quiet defiance, choosing happiness on your own terms. This is Anna's story, a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the unwavering strength it takes to break free from expectations. True happiness is not found in wealth or approval, but in the courage to walk away from those who never truly valued us. As the night unfolds, secrets will be exposed, choices will have consequences, and in the end, one woman will reclaim her power. Stay with me, because this is a story you won't forget. Anna stood in the quiet stillness of First Parish in Cambridge, the light from the stained glass windows casting soft, multicolored reflections onto the century-old wooden pews. The air carried the scent of blooming alyssum from the church garden, mingling with the distant hum of the city beyond. This place, historic and unassuming, would be where she and Ethan vowed their lives to each other. It was not grand. It was not lavish. But it was theirs. As she ran her fingers lightly over the smooth surface of a pew, the church coordinator hesitated beside her, flipping through the modest paperwork outlining the wedding arrangements. "Are you certain about this venue?" the woman asked carefully, her voice betraying polite skepticism. Anna met her gaze and nodded without hesitation. "Yes, this is exactly what we want." It was a choice that few would understand. In a city where weddings were often extravagant affairs, their budget of $25,000 was a mere fraction of what most couples spent. But for Anna and Ethan, this wedding was not about spectacle, it was about sincerity. The reception would take place at the Harvest, a small but charming restaurant just a few blocks away. It lacked the grandeur of a ballroom but radiated warmth. There would be no 10-tier cake or gourmet caviar, only a heartfelt meal, New England clam chowder, fresh Atlantic salmon, and a homemade Boston cream pie. It was simple, yet carefully chosen, much like everything about their wedding. Anna and Ethan had never measured love in material things. They had built their lives on shared ambition, quiet resilience, and the belief that happiness was not something to be bought. Ethan, a researcher at MIT working on treatments for neurodegenerative diseases, and Anna, a biologist at Harvard, had spent years navigating long hours and student loans together. Their combined income of $175,000 was comfortable but far from extravagant, especially with the financial burden they were determined to clear. They had made a choice, an intimate wedding now, so they could secure their future later. But when Anna stepped into her childhood home that evening, her quiet certainty collided with a world that had never shared her values. Luxury wedding catalogs covered every inch of the coffee table, glossy pages displaying designer gowns, crystal chandeliers, and breathtaking coastal venues. In the center of the room, her sister Lauren sat poised, a pristine invitation in her manicured hands, her expression smug with unspoken condescension. "This," Lauren said, spreading open a brochure for a 5-star resort, "is a wedding. My wedding." Anna's stomach clenched as she glanced at the details. A $150,000 event, entirely paid for by Lauren's fiancé's wealthy family. Over 200 guests. Imported flowers. A world-class chef. A champagne tower. It was an affair of excess, the very opposite of what Anna and Ethan had chosen. Their mother beamed with delight, her voice thick with admiration. "It's going to be exquisite," she gushed, her eyes shining. Truly a once-in-a-lifetime event. Then, just as easily as the warmth had filled her voice, it vanished when she turned to Anna. "You're really getting married in some old church?" she asked, her lips tightening in disapproval. "How do you expect me to tell my friends that my daughter is having a budget wedding?" Anna felt her pulse quicken. She had expected resistance, but the open disdain still stung. "I'll be at Lauren's wedding," her mother continued, turning another page in the catalog as if Anna weren't even standing there. "But I won't come to yours." A cold silence settled over the room. Anna's gaze shifted to her father, searching for something, support, understanding, anything, but he only nodded, silent and complicit, just as he always had been. Lauren, beautiful and effortlessly confident, leaned forward, her voice sweet but laced with superiority. "Come on, Anna. You can still change your mind." Anna gripped the strap of her bag tighter, pushing down the bitterness rising in her throat. "Ethan and I are happy with our choice," she said evenly. The dismissal was immediate. The conversation, in their eyes, was already over. As she stepped back out into the cool night air, she barely heard the rustling of the catalogs behind her. The scent of designer perfume lingered, but the wind carried it away, dissolving into the streets of Cambridge. On the train ride home, she pressed her forehead to the window, watching the city blur past. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name. She answered, and his voice, steady and warm, wrapped around her like a safety net. "It's okay, Anna," he murmured. "We have our own happiness, even if your family doesn't see it yet." She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, allowing the truth of his words to settle. They did not need chandeliers or fireworks. They did not need their love to be measured by dollar signs. They had each other. And that was enough. The morning of the wedding arrived with a golden glow spreading across the city, the crisp spring air carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Anna stood at the entrance of First Parish in Cambridge, staring up at the towering spire, the place where she had chosen to begin the next chapter of her life. The century-old church stood strong, a silent testament to countless vows made before her. It wasn't a grand cathedral, nor an opulent ballroom, but it was filled with history, with meaning. And today, it would be filled with love. Inside, the quiet hum of conversation mixed with the soft rustling of flowers being arranged on the altar. Anna's best friend, Sarah, moved between the pews, carefully placing sprigs of baby's breath and delicate white roses. Across the room, Ethan's mother adjusted the floral centerpieces, her warm smile filling the space with an undeniable sense of belonging. Every small touch carried the weight of sincerity, a stark contrast to the cold grandeur of her sister's wedding preparations. Anna ran her fingers over the lace veil draped across her shoulders. It wasn't new, nor was it a designer piece, but it held more value than any luxury gown ever could. It had been her grandmother's, passed down through generations, carrying the love and devotion of the women in her family who had come before her. "Are you ready?" Emily, her colleague from the lab, asked hesitantly, helping her smooth the fabric of her dress. Anna met her gaze in the mirror, inhaling deeply before answering. "Yes." Then came the question she had been dreading. "Are your parents coming?" For a moment, Anna hesitated. She had rehearsed this answer in her mind countless times, shaping it into something clean and effortless, something that wouldn't reveal the ache that still sat deep in her chest. "No," she finally said, keeping her voice steady. "They chose not to." Emily's expression flickered with sympathy, but Anna turned away before it could settle. She would not let their absence define this day. The church bells rang softly, signaling the moment had come. Anna lifted her bouquet, steadying herself before stepping toward the aisle. The moment she had envisioned for months unfolded around her, but there was an emptiness she could not ignore. The front row of pews, the place where her parents should have been seated, remained vacant. The silent space where they had chosen not to be. A brief flicker of sadness threatened to settle in, but then her eyes moved beyond the empty seats. 50 pairs of eyes watched her with warmth, with unwavering support. Her colleagues, her friends, the people who had seen her dedication, her kindness, her perseverance, they were here. Ethan's family, the people who had welcomed her without hesitation, were here. And at the end of the aisle, waiting with a look that held nothing but love, was Ethan. Her breath hitched. She took her first step forward. Each step was not just toward the altar but toward a new certainty. This was not a walk of resignation or of longing for approval that would never come. This was a declaration. A choice to embrace the life she and Ethan had built, free from expectations that had never served them.